She called him Sir, the way hotel security calls someone Sir, right before they ask them to leave. Warren Colby was standing at the entrance to the Executive Club Lounge on the 14th floor of the Ashford Grand in Omaha, Nebraska, a 9-year-old girl holding 2 of his fingers, and a woman in a charcoal blazer standing between him and the room. The lounge behind her was the kind of quiet that cost money, low lighting, leather chairs, a sideboard of food that nobody was actually eating because they were all too busy looking at the man in the doorway. He was wearing dark jeans that had faded from years of actual use. His flannel shirt was the color of dried grass, and his boots had the particular worn-in quality of footwear that had walked through actual garage floors rather than the kind of shops that sell boots to look that way. He was carrying a canvas duffel over one shoulder. Walking next to him, gripping his hand with both of hers, was Ivy. Ivy Colby was 9 years old and had her father's calm eyes and her late mother's way of watching people like she was taking notes. She was wearing a green jacket with a small embroidered cardinal on the collar because she'd picked it out herself at a second-hand shop in Millhaven and refused to leave without it. She had a small backpack shaped like a turtle. "This lounge is for suite guests and executive members only," the woman said. Her name tag read Priscilla, and she wasn't hotel staff. She was wearing a blazer with a small enamel pin on the lapel. The kind of pin that means you've paid to be a member of something. "I don't think you're in the right place." Warren looked at her. He had the kind of face that didn't rearrange itself much when things happened to it. 41 years old, broad through the shoulders from years of working with his hands. Not in a gym, but in the actual physical way of a man who lifts engine blocks and climbs under cars on a regular basis. He had a slight scar along his left jaw from a welding accident when he was 24 that he'd never thought to explain to anyone because it had never come up. "Room 1407, he said, "suite guests." The woman, Priscilla, glanced at him in a way that lasted about half a second too long. Her eyes went to his shirt, his boots, back to his face. Whatever she was calculating, it arrived at a conclusion she didn't bother to fully conceal. "I'll need to verify that," she said, "with the front desk. My keycard's right here." He reached for his wallet. "I'd prefer to confirm through the hotel directly." She was already looking past him toward the hallway, as if searching for the right person to handle this. Ivy looked up at her. "We came up in the elevator," she said, not accusatory, just clarifying. The way kids clarify things when adults seem confused about facts that seem obvious. Priscilla did not look at Ivy. What Warren didn't know yet, standing in the doorway with his daughter's hand in his, was that Priscilla Drummond had been the one who flagged him. Not a staff member, not security. Her. She'd seen him step off the elevator from across the lounge and made a phone call to the concierge desk downstairs before he'd even reached the entrance. 2 minutes after that call, a hotel manager named George had appeared looking slightly uncomfortable, which was how Warren first noticed something was off. Priscilla Drummond was 38 years old and the founder of Drummond Consulting Group, a firm that advised manufacturing companies on operational restructuring with offices in Chicago, Dallas, and Atlanta. She'd built the company from the ground up after 15 years in corporate consulting, which she'd entered straight out of Wharton. She was smart, she was driven, and she had a very specific and well-practiced sense of which rooms she belonged in and which ones she didn't, and by extension, who else belonged in them. She had been at the Ashford Grand since Monday for a quarterly partner meeting. She had a corner room on the 15th floor and had been using the Executive Club Lounge every morning for breakfast and every evening for the complimentary wine service. She knew most of the regular faces up here by now. The man in the grass-colored flannel shirt was not one of them. George, the hotel manager, arrived with the particular posture of someone doing something he'd been asked to do, but wasn't entirely sure he should be doing. He was, maybe 50, with the measured courtesy of a man who had managed enough uncomfortable situations to have developed a very neutral expression for them. "Sir," he said to Warren, "I understand you're a guest of the hotel. Could I see your room key just to confirm access to the lounge?" Warren produced the key card without any particular irritation and handed it to George. George ran it through the small reader on the hostess stand, looked at the screen. Something shifted in his posture. "Suite 1407, George confirmed. He handed the key back. You're absolutely welcome here, Mr. Colby. Mr. Colby, I apologize for the inconvenience. Priscilla's expression didn't change in any dramatic way, but something in her jaw tightened. There should be a dietary flag on the reservation, Warren said. My daughter's allergic to tree nuts. Of course. I'll speak to the kitchen right now. George walked away. Warren moved to step past Priscilla into the lounge. She didn't step aside immediately. Not long, maybe 2 seconds, but long enough for it to be something rather than nothing. My mistake, she said. Her voice was professionally smooth, the kind of smooth that comes from practice. Sure, Warren said and walked into the lounge. He chose a table near the windows that looked out over the Omaha skyline. In the early November afternoon, the Missouri River a gray line in the distance. Ivy climbed into the chair across from him and unzipped her turtle backpack and pulled out a book. She was currently working through a series about a girl who discovers a colony of foxes living under her school. And she had strong opinions about whether the third book was going to resolve the main conflict satisfactorily. Warren ordered coffee. Ivy asked for hot chocolate and clarified 3 times that it could not have nuts in it, which the server confirmed each time with what appeared to be genuine patience. That lady, Ivy said, not looking up from her book. Yeah. She didn't think we were supposed to be here. Warren looked out the window. Doesn't seem like it. Why? He thought about that for a moment. The honest answer was also the complicated answer, and Ivy was 9. But she was also the kind of 9 that processed complicated things if you explained them straight. She looked at us, he said, and decided she already knew who we were. Ivy turned a page. That's a dumb way to decide things. People do it more than you'd think. She looked at him over the top of her book. Does it make you mad? He considered this with the seriousness it deserved. A little, he said, but being mad in here doesn't help anything, so I'm just going to drink my coffee. She nodded, like that was a reasonable position, and went back to her foxes. What Warren had not told Ivy, because she was 9 and didn't need the full context, was why he was in Omaha at all. The reason was as a meeting scheduled for 6 o'clock that evening with Martin Feld, Vice President of Advanced Systems at Kettridge Automotive, and 2 members of Kettridge's legal team. The meeting was about 3 patents that Warren had filed over the course of 7 years, while working as a lead engineer at a Midwest auto parts manufacturer. Patents related to a thermal management system for EV battery packs that significantly extended both range and lifespan in cold weather conditions. He'd developed the core framework in the last 2 years of his career, after his wife Leanne got sick, and he'd started working nights because he couldn't sleep. The patents were his. Because the company had let the filing window lapse on a piece of intellectual property, they hadn't understood well enough to know what they had. Warren had understood what he had. He'd filed quietly and correctly, and then he'd taken Ivy to Millhaven, his hometown in the Nebraska Sandhills where he'd grown up, and he'd opened a small garage on the edge of town that he ran himself with one part-time helper named Bert, and he'd started living the life that made sense after Leanne died. The patents had generated interest for 3 years, but Kettridge was different. Kettridge was not a small player expressing curiosity. They were one of the top 4 domestic EV manufacturers, and what they were offering was an exclusive licensing agreement worth, in the language Martin Feld had used on the phone 2 weeks ago, a number that made the other offers look like offers. Warren had come to Omaha to hear the number in person and decide what to do about it. He'd brought Ivy because her regular sitter, a retired school teacher named Bev, had a knee replacement scheduled that week, and because Ivy had asked to come, and because Warren didn't like leaving her for more than a day with people who didn't know her. He hadn't thought much about what he was wearing. Across the lounge, Priscilla Drummond was on her phone at a corner table, turned slightly away from the room. Her voice was low and controlled. She was not looking at Warren. She had looked at him once more after the hotel manager left, and then she had looked away, and something in the quality of that second look, shorter, more deliberate, had told Warren exactly what kind of recalibration was happening behind it. He drank his coffee. Ivy got through 4 chapters. The hot chocolate arrived correctly. At 5:43, Warren's phone buzzed on the table. A text from Martin Feld. Running about 10 minutes early if you're ready. Legal team is here. Want to meet in the lounge? Warren typed back, works for me. 12 minutes later, Martin Feld walked into the executive club lounge with two people behind him. A woman carrying a leather portfolio and a younger man with a laptop bag. Martin was 53, tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that announced itself as expensive without trying too hard. He came straight to Warren's table, hand extended before he'd even fully arrived. Warren. He shook hands with the particular warmth of a man who genuinely respects the person he's greeting. You look exactly like your profile photo. I mean that as a compliment. Most people don't. My daughter Ivy, Warren said. Martin crouched slightly to be at eye level. Hey Ivy, you a Fox fan? He nodded at the book cover. They're misunderstood, Ivy said, with the directness of someone who has had this conversation before. Fair point, Martin said seriously. He straightened up and introduced his colleagues. The woman with the portfolio was Nadine Correll, their head of IP licensing, and the younger man was their associate counsel, Travis Beam. Martin pulled a chair over and sat. Before we get into the specifics, he said, I want to say something off the record. What you built, the thermoframe system, the passive load balancing architecture, our engineering team spent 8 months trying to understand it deeply enough to tell me what it was worth. They came back with a consensus. He looked at Warren steadily. It's the single most elegant cold climate battery management approach we've seen. And we've seen everything. I was building it for one car, Warren said. Leanne's. She hated how the range dropped in winter. Martin was quiet for a beat. Well, he said finally, it's going to help a lot of cars. Nadine Correll opened the portfolio. The number on the first page was the kind of number that doesn't fully process the first time you see it. It settled somewhere in Warren's chest in a way that had nothing to do with excitement and everything to do with the particular weight of something becoming real that you'd believed in for a long time, without letting yourself believe in too loudly. He didn't react in any obvious way. He read the page. He asked 3 questions. Martin answered them. Nadine added 2 clarifications. Travis flagged a detail on the exclusivity window. None of them noticed when Priscilla Drummond stood up from her table. None of them noticed when she walked over. Martin. Her voice carried a quality of precise social confidence. Martin Feld, I didn't know you were in Omaha. Martin looked up. His expression shifted, not unfriendly, but the specific register of a very busy person who has been interrupted during something they were focused on. Priscilla, hey! The Drummond Group has been trying to get time on your calendar for about 3 months, she said, with a smile that was professionally warm. Your assistant keeps saying Q1. Q1 is probably right, Martin said. We're in the middle of something here. Of course. She glanced at the table. Her eyes moved across Nadine Correll, Travis Beam, and then landed on Warren. Something happened in that landing. A pause. The kind of pause you have when 2 pieces of information collide and neither one is what you expected. I'm sorry, I don't think I caught your name earlier. You didn't ask for it, Warren said. Another pause, shorter, heavier. This is Warren Colby, Martin said, with the tone of someone providing information he assumed was obvious. He's the reason we're in Omaha. Priscilla looked at Warren, then at Martin, then back at Warren. The thermoframe patents. Among others, Martin said. Kettridge has been chasing those patents for. She stopped herself. It was a clean stop. The kind that comes from professional discipline. She was doing math in her head, and the math was arriving at something she didn't want to finish out loud. 2 years, Martin confirmed pleasantly. We were persistent. Priscilla's posture was very still. Mr. Colby, she said, I owe you an apology. I was the one who asked George to check your access to the lounge earlier. I shouldn't have done that. No, Warren said, you shouldn't. I made an assumption based on. I know what it was based on. The table was quiet. Nadine Correll was suddenly very interested in a page in her portfolio. Travis Beam found something on his laptop that required his full attention. Ivy, Warren said. Ivy looked up from her book. This is Ms. Drummond, he said. She has something she wants to say to you. Priscilla Drummond looked at the 9-year-old across the table. In the way that sometimes happens in charged moments, the room felt smaller. The ambient noise of the lounge went somewhere else. I treated you and your dad unfairly today, Priscilla said. Her voice was not quite steady. I looked at you both and made a decision before I knew anything real. I'm sorry I did that. Ivy studied her for a long moment. The way she studied things she was still deciding about. Okay, she said. And then, my hot chocolate has no nuts in it. They were very careful. Something crossed Priscilla's face that might, in different circumstances, have been the beginning of a real smile. I'm glad, she said. She nodded once at Warren and walked back to her table and collected her things and left the lounge. Nobody at Warren's table said anything about it. Martin cleared his throat and picked up where they'd left off with the exclusivity window. The evening went forward. What none of them knew was that a man named Carl Denby, a sales rep from Des Moines waiting in the lounge for a delayed flight connection, had been recording on his phone since the moment George arrived with the key card. He'd started filming because, in his words later, something felt wrong and he wanted to know what he was looking at. He'd kept filming through Martin's arrival, through Priscilla's recognition of the patents, through the apology to Ivy. The video was 16 minutes long. He posted it at 11 that night with a caption that said, "Woman at hotel had a man and his daughter removed from a lounge they had every right to be in, then found out who he was. Watch the whole thing. Judge for yourself." By 2 in the morning, it had 4 million views. By the time Warren woke up and checked his phone at Ivy's insistence, because it had been buzzing for an hour straight, it had passed 20 million. He sat on the edge of the hotel bed in the early gray light and watched 16 minutes of footage he'd been present for and experienced differently through a screen. He watched himself hand the keycard to George. He watched Ivy look at Priscilla with those calm, note-taking eyes. He watched Martin walk in and say his name like it was obvious, because to Martin it was obvious. He watched Priscilla's face when the patents registered. And then he watched Ivy say okay and go back to her book. He put the phone face down on the bedspread and sat there for a while. Priscilla Drummond found out at 7 when her communications director, Tara, called her hotel room. The Drummond Group's social media accounts had begun receiving messages at scale. 3 clients had sent inquiries by email asking about the incident. 4 media requests had arrived before 8 a.m. She watched the video alone in her hotel room, twice. She had replayed the moment in the lounge many times through the night. What she kept returning to was not the part where Martin Feld said Warren Colby's name, and she understood what she'd done. She kept returning to 4 seconds earlier, when she'd first seen a man in a worn flannel shirt step off the elevator and made a decision about him before he'd spoken a single word, before she'd seen his face clearly, before Ivy had looked up from her book. 4 seconds, a reflex so fast she hadn't been aware of running it. The statement she put out the next morning at 9 a.m. had her name on it, not her company's. Tara read it at 7 in the morning before it went out and was quiet for a moment and then said, "This is going to get a different kind of attention than the video." "I know," Priscilla said. "Some people will say it's damage control. Some people will say that no matter what." She looked out the window at Chicago going gray in the early light. "I mean it. That's the only thing I can control." The statement spread faster than the video had. By noon, it had been read more times than the original clip. It said specifically that she had made an immediate and unfounded judgment about a man and his daughter based on what they were wearing and how she expected the room to look. That Ivy in particular had done nothing to deserve being caught in that. That she was not using the word mistake because mistake implied an accident, and what she had done wasn't an accident. It was a quick, unexamined bias that she intended to examine now. Warren read it standing in the hotel lobby, Ivy next to him already wearing her coat and impatient to see the old Market District because she'd seen a photo of it and decided it was important. He read it twice. "Someone wrote something honest," he told Ivy when she asked what he was looking at. "About what?" "About a mistake they made." Ivy thought about this. Was it hard to write? Probably. He put the phone in his pocket. "Let's go see the market." She took his hand, and they went. There turned out to be a second thread to the story, one that didn't surface publicly for another 3 weeks. It surfaced because Priscilla, in the week after the video, had done something her lawyers advised against and did anyway. She'd gone looking for the reason the situation had happened in the first place. Not her bias. She'd already reckoned with that. Something else. because the more she thought about it, the more one thing didn't sit right. She had known about Warren Colby's patents. Not in detail, not the way Martin Feld knew them, but she had known the name. It had come up 6 weeks earlier in a conversation with a man named Ashton Price, a private equity consultant who'd been pitching her on a potential acquisition target. Price had mentioned, almost in passing, that a patent holder in Nebraska was about to close a significant deal with a major EV company and that the IP space around cold climate battery systems was worth watching. At the time, she'd filed it as industry background noise. Now she thought about it differently. She had been in Omaha for her quarterly partner meeting. She had not known that Warren would be there, at the same hotel, in the same lounge. She'd made her judgment entirely on her own. Nobody had primed her to. But someone had known Warren would be there, and Ashton Price had known about the deal timeline. Price had known which hotel. She called his office on a Thursday afternoon and asked him directly whether he'd known she was attending the quarterly meeting in Omaha. He hesitated for long enough that she had the answer before he gave one. He had known. He'd known about her meeting from a mutual contact and had known she'd likely be using the executive club lounge. He hadn't told her Warren would be there. He'd simply made sure the information about the patents was fresh in her mind 6 weeks before, planted just below the surface, and then let whatever happened happen. It hadn't been subtle. It hadn't needed to be. She had done the rest herself. Priscilla sat in her office for a long time after that call. There was a version of this she could tell herself where she was mostly a pawn, where the bias had been exploited by someone who understood it would be there. It was a version with truth in it. But she kept returning to the same wall. Nobody had told her to look at Warren Colby and render a verdict in 4 seconds. Nobody had engineered the expression on her face when she'd seen his boots. Nobody had made her call the concierge desk before she'd heard him speak a single word that had been entirely, specifically hers. She picked up the phone and called Warren's number. He answered on the third ring from somewhere loud. Metal sounds, a radio playing old country faintly in the background. This is Warren. Mr. Colby, it's Priscilla Drummond. She'd decided not to build up to things anymore. I have information I think you should hear. It involves someone who may have arranged the situation deliberately, knowing both of us would be in that hotel. I want to tell you directly, before I talk to anyone else, because you're the one who was hurt. The sounds in the background went quieter. Go ahead, he said. She told him everything about Ashton Price. When she finished, there was a silence. You're telling me this before your lawyers know you're telling me. Yes. Why? She thought about Ivy looking at her across the table. She thought about Warren saying, she has something she wants to say to you, which was the part of the video she'd watched the most. The part that had landed the hardest. Because you were the one in the room, she said. You and your daughter. And whatever Price thought he was arranging, he couldn't have arranged anything if I hadn't behaved exactly the way I did. That means I have some responsibility for what you can do about it now. Warren was quiet for a long moment. Send me what you have, he said. Whatever documentation you've put together, send it today. I will. A pause. Miss Drummond. His voice was level, not warm, not hostile. I don't know you well enough to tell you what kind of person you are. I've seen you for 20 minutes under bad circumstances, and then read something you wrote. That's all I know. That's fair. But what you're doing right now is the right thing. Another pause. I wanted to say that directly. Thank you, she said, and meant it in the way you mean things when you've earned them the hard way. The documentation she sent that afternoon, combined with what Warren's attorney built from it over the following weeks, was enough to make Ashton Price understand that his arrangement had produced an outcome he hadn't planned for. The meeting Warren was meant to disrupt had gone forward perfectly. The patents had been licensed, and now there were two people who understood exactly what he'd done, one of them with very good lawyers, and a very complete paper trail. Price settled quietly. He didn't make the news. These things rarely do. What did make the news, in a small and specific way, was the announcement in February of the Colby Fund, a scholarship and mentorship program for first-generation engineering students from working-class backgrounds, specifically in the automotive and energy sectors. Warren announced it at a community college in North Platte that had a vocational engineering program, standing at a folding table in a room that smelled like dry erase markers and old coffee. With 11 scholarship recipients in the front rows who had the particular expression of people who have been told something real is happening and are still deciding whether to trust it. He spoke for 9 minutes without notes. He talked about what it was like to be seen as the wrong thing in the right room. He talked about it specifically, not abstractly, not inspirationally, just specifically the way a person talks about something they've actually been through. He talked about Leanne briefly and without sentimentality. He said she'd worked 2 jobs while finishing her degree and that she'd believed in things before they were provable, which was the hardest kind of believing. He said the fund was for her too, though he didn't make a production of it. Ivy was in the audience in the 3rd row. She was wearing her green jacket with the cardinal on the collar. She had brought her Fox book and was reading it quietly until the moment her father said Leanne's name, at which point she closed the book and looked at the table for a while. After, in the parking lot, Ivy walked next to Warren toward his truck. It was February, and North Platte in February had the specific gray cold that settles in and doesn't apologize for itself. "Did you feel scared?" she asked. "When you were talking?" "A little." "You didn't sound it." "You can feel something and still decide how you act," he said. She thought about that. Her boots crunched on the frozen gravel. "The lady from the hotel," she said. "Is she okay now?" Warren glanced down at her. "I think she's working on it." "Good." Ivy considered this. "It's hard to work on things." "It is." She pulled her hat down lower over her ears. "Can we get food? I'm hungry and the drive back is long." "There's a diner on Route 83 that's supposed to be good." "Does it have hot chocolate?" "Every diner has hot chocolate." She accepted this as a sufficient answer and climbed into the truck. Warren started the engine and let it warm up, which took a minute in this cold. Through the community college windows, he could see people still talking, still in the specific posture of conversations that aren't finished yet. She smiled at her desk. The scholarship recipients were in the middle of it. 11 people whose next few years were going to go differently than they would have gone yesterday. He pulled out of the lot and onto the road toward home, where the garage was waiting, and Bert had been holding down the shop, and there were 3 vehicles in queue, and a carburetor he'd been meaning to get to all week. Ivy found her book in her bag and opened it. The Fox colony was in crisis. She read with the focused attention she brought to everything she decided was worth understanding. The sandhills appeared on either side of the highway as they drove, brown and quiet in the winter, no drama in them at all, just the long, particular patience of land that has been here for a very long time and will be here long after everyone driving across it has gone. "Is the fund named after us?" Ivy asked, not looking up. "After our name," Warren said. "Yeah." She turned a page. "Mom would have liked that." "Yeah," he said. "She would have." They drove the rest of the way home without saying much, which was the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. The kind that means everyone in the car is thinking about something true and doesn't need to explain it because the other person is probably thinking about the same thing. Ivy finished her chapter somewhere east of Thedford and closed the book and fell asleep against the window. Warren drove. Outside Nebraska in winter was exactly what it was. Flat, cold, honest, unapologetic about all 3 of those things. It didn't ask you to be impressed by it. It didn't perform anything for anyone. You either knew what it was worth or you didn't, and it wasn't going to argue with you either way. Warren Colby had always known what it was worth. He kept driving, his daughter asleep beside him, the road straight and certain in the headlights ahead, the dark land holding still around them in the way that things hold still when they have nothing left to prove.